So last time when I was asked to do a Bible study, we looked at the first two chapters of Daniel, and we was looking there at, do you remember how Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, they wouldn't compromise on their beliefs, and they said, look, we're not going to eat this food that's been offered up to idols, and we'd rather eat just water and pulse. And God blessed them through that, and they were showed to be more healthy than the other people. And God lifted them up in the ranks and lifted them up in Nebuchadnezzar's eyes, and they were given top jobs, wasn't they? And then, do you remember Daniel was able to tell Nebuchadnezzar what dream he'd had, that dream that kept him up all night. And Nebuchadnezzar dreamt of that statue whose head was made of gold, and whose chest and arms was made of silver, and his belly was made of brass, and then his legs iron, and then his feet were made of clay. And Daniel was able to tell Nebuchadnezzar about that dream. And remember, there was a big rock that come down and smashed that idol to pieces. And one of the things that Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar when he was revealing that dream to him was when he said about that great image, he said, "Thou, O king, sawest and beheld a great image. And this great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, and his breast and his arms silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his eggs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay." And then he was saying how that thou, O king, art a king of kings. Nebuchadnezzar was a great king. And Daniel said, look, you're a king of kings, Nebuchadnezzar. And the God of heaven has given you this kingdom. You know, the reason you are so great, that you're so good, that you won all these battles, is because God has given you this kingdom. And he's made you this great ruler, and he's given you power and strength and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, the fowls of the heaven, have he given into thine hand, and have made thee ruler over them. Thou art this head of gold. And then it goes on to the silver and the brass and the clay and the iron. And he was saying how that's lesser kingdoms coming after Nebuchadnezzar. Well, anyway, Daniel was rewarded for helping Nebuchadnezzar work out what that dream meant. And then years passed by, and then we're told of in chapter 3, where we read tonight, that Nebuchadnezzar has now made an image of gold. So I wonder where he got this idea from. You know, obviously if he'd had this dream and this thing was now floating around in his head, maybe it'd be good to have a statue. You know, perhaps I should have something put up. He didn't have one before. He had lots of idols around. He worshipped lots of false gods. But he thought, well, I'm going to make a statue of myself. And it tells us here that the statue's height was 80 cubits. And I was trying to remember back to my days into the Friday night Bible stories with Pete. And I'm sure he used to tell us that a cubit was a measurement from the tip of your finger down to your elbow. And I guess it depends how long your arm is. But I think it was roughly about 24 inches, I think was saying that was what the rough measurement of that is. And I had to Google it and work out what it is. But they reckon that 60 cubits is approximately about 30 metres high, or about 90 feet. And then I was hoping that I could Google something that would tell me how high 90 metres is, because I was, well, perhaps it's Big Ben, or perhaps the big wheel. But they're about 160 metres, so they're a lot taller than what this statue would have been. But what I did think was, when I used to go to school, I used to go swimming at the Crystal Palace swimming baths, and there were some diving boards there, and they had the smaller diving boards. Then there was a 5-metre diving board, that was 10 feet, and then there was the 30-metre diving board, the 10-metre diving board, and that was, I'll get my measurements wrong, but that was, the 10-metre board was about 30 feet anyway. So I thought, okay, so if it's 3 times as high as a 10-metre board in Crystal Palace, and I remember jumping off of that back at school, and that was quite high, and that would wind you when you landed in the water wrong. But that gave me an idea of roughly how tall this statue was. It was a big statue, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and it was made of all gold. So whereas the other statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreamt about, is only the head was gold and everything else was lesser metal, Nebuchadnezzar maybe thought in his mind, well, look, if that statue got destroyed because it had feet of clay, I'm not going to make that mistake. I'm going to make the whole thing of gold, and then everyone can see that, and then everyone can bow down and worship it. Because Nebuchadnezzar had a real problem with pride. He was a real proud person, and he wanted everyone to look up to him and to worship him. So he built this, or he asked for this statue to be raised up, and they built it in this place, the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon, so for everyone to see. So there's a big open area, and there was this huge statue put together, all made out of gold, standing there in the sun. And as the sun hit this statue, everyone would be able to see it, and you could probably see it from miles around, glistening in the distance. And then he said, well, look, let's celebrate this statue that we got all together. So he asked everyone to come together. He got all the important people all together. He got the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the councillors, the sheriffs, the rulers, all to come and dedicate this statue to Nebuchadnezzar. So he wanted everyone to see him, and he wanted all the important people to be there, and he wanted all the important people to then tell everybody else, come and look at this amazing statue. How good is Nebuchadnezzar? How wonderful is he? How great is he? And all this was probably going on in his mind. And then after he had this dedication here, he then went further, and he got a herald to come out in verse 4, and his job was to cry out, and he cried aloud to all the nations and all the languages, and commanded that this was a king's decree, that whenever you hear the music, and then it lists all these different instruments, all these weird and wonderful instruments there in verse 5, whenever you hear this music, you must bow down. Whatever you're doing, you've got to stop what you're doing and get down on the floor, and you've got to bow down, and you've got to worship this golden statue of your king Nebuchadnezzar, because he has ordered it, and because he's a great almighty king, all powerful. Everyone must do what he says. And if you don't do what he says, then you're going to be cast into the burning fiery furnace. He didn't mess about, Nebuchadnezzar. You know, when he made a rule, it was either do this or you lose out. Do you remember last time he was saying to people he was going to make their house a dunghill, and he was going to cut them up. And if people couldn't tell him what his dream was, he was then just going to destroy all the wise men, all the magicians, all his clever people that he had in his kingdom. He used to lose his temper quite a lot. And so the same thing here again. He said, look, I've built this statue. I want everyone to recognise who I am. I want everyone to bow down and worship me. I want this to be like a god in their sight. He had all these other false gods, and now he made himself a god, and said he wanted people to worship him. And there'd be no excuses. And when they hear the music, everyone was to bow down and come and worship him. So then in verse 8, we find out that the Chaldeans, some of his clever people that he had around, the people who used to tell him his dreams, they came near to the king and they accused the Jews. They wasn't happy with the Jews, and they came near to the king and they accused the Jews, and they said, look, O King Nebuchadnezzar, live forever. You know, you made a decree, O king. We all heard your decree. We all heard what you said. We all know what the rules are. If the music plays, you must bow down and worship that statue. Otherwise, you said, we'll be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. He said, I don't know if you know, Nebuchadnezzar, but there's some Jews in your kingdom that you've given some pretty good jobs to. You know, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. They're raised up in the provinces. And when the music plays, they don't bow down to your statue. In fact, they make a point of not bowing down to your statue. And they said they don't serve your gods either. All these other gods that you have, that you've told us that we should worship, they don't bow down and worship those gods either. What are you going to do about this, O king? These Chaldeans obviously are a little bit jealous of Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. They put God first, and they've been rewarded by that, and they've been lifted up. But they lived their lives to put God first. They weren't following men. They weren't men pleasers. They respected the king. He was the king, and they understood that God had put Nebuchadnezzar in that throne, and so they respected him as a king. But when it came to if they would serve God or if they would serve Nebuchadnezzar, then their mind was set and their hearts was set. And they remembered the laws of the Old Testament of Abraham, and they wouldn't bow down to these false gods. So then in verse 13, when Nebuchadnezzar is told this, again we see his reaction to this, and it's not good. So Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury. So straight away, as soon as he's told that someone isn't doing what he says, someone's disregarding him, his pride is there again. And in his rage and in his fury, he commands that Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego get brought before him. He wants to see these men. He wants to see why it is that they're not going to bow down to him, why it is that they're not going to come and obey what he said. He's given a commandment. He wants people to obey him. He expects people to obey him, and he's not happy that these people weren't going to do so. And, thinking a bit about ourselves, maybe we've got to think of ourselves and our temper. What we like at keeping our temper. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't very good at keeping his temper. He was always losing it. But what are we like? Do we lose our temper often? And we need to ask ourselves why we lose our temper. Why do we get angry? There is such a thing as righteous anger. Are we right to be angry? Or are we angry because when it comes down to it, we're like Nebuchadnezzar and his pride? We tell someone to do something and they don't do it, and that upsets us. Or we expect better of someone and they don't do it, and that's not, we don't like that. It sort of riles us up, and we feel it's not fair. Why is these people not doing that when I've got to do this? And there's a lot of these feelings that maybe we have inside of us that we need to keep check of. But here we are, Nebuchadnezzar has lost his temper. He's called Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego to come in. And now they're standing before him. Perhaps he's calmed down a little bit. And Nebuchadnezzar, being the king, he says, well, I'm going to give these men a second chance. So in verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar speaks unto them, and he asks them this question. So Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, I've heard, almost like they're on trial in a courtroom, I've heard that you're not bowing down to my idol when the music plays. Is this right? You know what the commandments are. You must do this, you must bow down. I'm the king, you must do as I say. Is this true? Are you not bowing down to what to this idol that I've made? Do you not serve my gods? Do you not worship me? And then he says, look, if when I play the music, I'm going to play the music in a minute. If I play this music and you bow down and you worship that statue, you worship that idol of me, well then that's okay. I'll let you go. We'll call this a warning and off you go. But if you refuse again, if you disobey me again, then this same hour you will be taken and you will be cast into that burning fiery furnace. So there was no mistake what was going to happen. And Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego now are put in this position. And, sometimes maybe do we find ourselves in that position? Do we find ourselves in the position where we've got to, decide, are we going to follow God? Or are we going to, maybe not stick our neck out, maybe not show ourselves up, maybe not embarrass ourselves, maybe just go along with the flow. It's not what I want to do, but I'm not going to make a scene. I'm not going to, I'm not going to cause any upset. I don't want to offend my work colleagues or my family. So maybe this isn't that important. And what sort of things do we let slide in our Christian life? Where do we make a stand? Where do you say, no, this is God's word, this is what I'm going to do? Or where do we say, well, that doesn't really matter so much. I used to do that, but it's not so important anymore now. And maybe I'm going to not be as strict as I once was with God's law. I know what God's law says, I know what it means, but I'm saved. A bit like what Barry was saying the other day, where sin abounds, grace does much more abound. So I know I'm saved. I know that I'm a sinner. I know I'm still going to break God's law. But if I sin, grace abounds. Maybe we'll just let that go and not worry too much about it. But not with these guys, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. They was conscious of the law of God, and they wanted to make sure that whatever else that they kept his law. And just reading back from Exodus chapter 20, verse 3, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. So the Israelites had already been kicked out of Jerusalem and Judah, and they'd been brought into Babylon because they'd fallen away from serving the Lord, and they'd been worshipping false idols and not keeping the law of God. And so Meshach, Shadrach and Abednego, this was very acute to them. They said, no, we're going to serve God no matter what. And this is the feel that you get for these men. You know, no matter what, they was always going to put God first. And so they stood before the king, and the king has given this ultimatum: I'm going to play this music now. If you don't bow down, then I'm going to throw you into that burning fiery furnace. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were courageous, they were bold, they had faith in their God, and they believed in their God. And they said to Nebuchadnezzar, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer in this matter." So they said, "Look, this is an easy question. You know, you might think that you're asking us a hard question. And it's got a difficult answer. We need to think about this. You know, we need to know a bit sure about this. Our life's on the line. But for us, O King Nebuchadnezzar, never still being respectful. You're still the king. This is an easy question for us to answer. You're asking me, will I bow down and worship this false idol, this false god? The answer is no. I will not do that. I have one true God, and He has told me that you should not make any false gods. You should not bow down to any graven image. We will put our trust in God." And it says there, I'll read those verses out to you. "We are not careful," this is verse 16, "we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, if it's God's will, if God chooses, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And He will deliver us out of thine hand, O King." So what were they saying? Were they saying that, I don't know that they thought that, you know, God would deliver them from the flames. You know, we know the story, so we got a bit of hindsight on this and we know what's going to happen. But, you know, whether they sort of thought, you know, the flames aren't going to touch us, it's going to throw us in and we won't be burnt up, or whether they thought something else was going to happen and they just wouldn't be thrown into the fiery furnace altogether. But they said there, like, if it be so, if it's God's will, and our God whom we serve is able to deliver us, we believe that He's more than able to deliver us. We don't know how He's going to deliver us, but He'll deliver us from that burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of thine hand, O King. Remember, O King, you're only a king because God has made you so. You've only got this power because God has made you this king. He gave you this kingdom. You know, you're not a god. Nebuchadnezzar had this complex where he seemed to think that he was, because everyone treated him as such, he thought he was this god that was over all these different people, but he was just a man. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will bring them back down to earth again. So look, you know, if it so be, then you know God can deliver us from you. You can't harm us. If God wants this thing to happen, then you can't stop it. And then in verse 18, even harder in one sense, it says, "But if not, be it known unto thee, O King, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." So they're saying here, look, we know our God is an almighty, all-powerful God. He made this whole earth. He created us out of dust. He can do all things. You know, you read through the Old Testament. He opened up the Red Sea. He sent down the flood. He opened up the earth and those people of Korah, and they all fell in. The Tower of Babel, where He split up everyone's languages. All these wonderful things that happened. You know, these were great men of God. They were men of prayer. They would have been with Daniel. They would have prayed to God together. Daniel had all those things revealed to him by the Lord as well. So they had no doubt, and their faith was strong. And they said, look, if God will deliver us, He will do so, and He will deliver us from that burning fiery furnace. But if God chooses not to deliver us from that burning fiery furnace, and it means that we're going to end up losing our lives, then so be it. We'll do that. We'd rather lose our life than bow down and worship this golden image which you've set up. They had their eyes on the prize, didn't they? They realised that this earth is only a temporal place. We're not here forever. This earth is not the be-all and end-all. They weren't fixed on all the things around them. They could see past that. They could see that they want to be with the Lord in glory, you know, and they would rather serve God, and if it meant losing their life, that they would be with Him. But they wouldn't jeopardize that. They wouldn't throw that away just to be released. They'd rather die than let God down. And we see Nebuchadnezzar's reaction to this. So he was angry the first time around when he was told no, but now when he's given them, and he thinks he's being all kind to him, he thinks he's giving them his second chance, and they threw it back in his face almost, then we see that Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed. So his face completely changed. It's like he's gone into, he's changed completely. He's gone mad. His face has changed against them. He's lost control now completely. And he said, well, that's it. I've had enough. I can't deal with this anymore. And he said, the people that were looking after the furnace, this burning fiery furnace that's already full of flames, if you throw someone in there, they're already going to die. And he said, right, I want you to heat that up 7 times hotter than it should be. So it's already as hot as it can be. I want you to burn it up 7 times as hot as it can be. At home we've got one of those little wood burners, and you can put bits of wood in there and sit there on the winter's night. It's quite nice to sit in front of it and feel the heat just coming out of that small little box, just burning bits of wood. And sometimes you can get quite a bit of heat coming out of that. You sit too close and you can feel your skin starting to heat up. And your hands are covered in ash every time you touch the thing to put something else in. You're filthy and you stink of fire. And but Nebuchadnezzar said, I want you to burn it up. I want you to raise up the heat 7 times more than it should be, 7 times more than it's meant to be. And the people in his service, they done that. They obeyed what he said, and they turned up the heat. And then he commanded his most mighty men, his strongest soldiers. And he said, right, I want you to tie up Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, bind them up, and then cast them into the middle of the burning fiery furnace. So whether this was a thing that you open up and you throw people in, or whether it was a pit that you throw people down to, I'm not really sure. But either way, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego were going in. So now they realised what the answer was. They weren't going to escape it. They were going to end up in the fire. And as these doors were open and they threw these men in, we said that the fire leapt out and killed these men, wasn't it? In verse 22, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace was exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. I remember there was a film I think called Backdraft. I remember watching that quite a few years ago, and about all the firemen, and they go into these burning buildings. And then I think the big thing was, they go up to a door and they'd feel the door, and if the door was very hot, then they could tell there's a fire underneath it. And they had this special effects where you see the fire suck back into the room, and then when they open the door floods all the oxygen, and then the flames leap out. And I get the picture. It's a bit like this, as they went in and they open up this burning fiery furnace, the flames leapt out of them, and they burnt up these men that carried out Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. They lost their lives trying to throw them into the fire. And then still Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, they still ended up in the fire. So whether these men fell into the furnace with them, but they all got burnt up. And then we see then that in verse 24, Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. So Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego were thrown into the burning fiery furnace, bound up, tied up. But then Nebuchadnezzar, he jumps up and is astonished, and he says to his counselors, people around him, did we throw 3 men into that fire? They said, yeah, you threw 3 men in, true, O Lord. And then he answered and says, lo, I see 4 men loose. So whether it was only Nebuchadnezzar that could see them and not anyone else, but Nebuchadnezzar could see 4 men. And these 4 men weren't lying up burning in the corner. These 4 men were loose, walking around the furnace. So do you remember Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego? They were tied up. They were tied up in all their coats and in their hats and their hose and their garments, and then were tied up, thrown into the fire, everything on them. He said, but I can see these men, and they're loose, and they're walking around in the midst of the fire. And they have no hurt. They're not in any pain. They're not crying out. The fire has no power over them. And this fourth person that I can see, the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. And in my margin it says, in other version it says, Son of the gods. But I like this here, this translation here, it's like the Son of God. So here you have Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. They put their whole trust in God. They said, no matter what, we're going to keep his word. We're going to do what he says. And if it means we're going to lose our lives, so be it. We'd rather serve God than disobey his law. And because they've done this, because these men trusted in the Lord and had faith in God and kept His word, sure enough, like we read there back in Exodus chapter 20, showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. You keep God's commandments and He will show you mercy. And He had mercy here on Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. And the Lord Himself come down, was there with them. He was there with them in the burning fiery furnace. And sometimes, perhaps that happens to us. Perhaps that needs to happen to us. Perhaps we need to go to some kind of trial or some kind of tribulation in our life. Maybe we're too comfortable with the way that things are. Maybe we've got things that bind us up. Maybe we've got, like these men were tied up and bound up. Maybe we've got things that are tying us up in our life and they're bringing us down and causing us distress. And then things get from bad to worse. And then we end up in this fiery tribulation. But isn't it great here that the Lord was with them? So they put God first and He never left them. He never left them on their own, but He was there with them in that burning fiery furnace. And the Lord will be so with us. We ask God to help us and keep us. He knows all that we go through. He knows all the things that are going on in our lives. And when we're going through those difficult times, He will be there with us. And He will help us and He will guide us through those hard trials. And He kept Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego safe, and He stayed there with them. And then Nebuchadnezzar, he had to go up to the burning fiery furnace, and he called out to them, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. And then listen to this, he says, servants of the Most High God. So he's realised now, he's seen that these men, their faith is true, their love for God is true, and that their God is true. He's heard about this God before from Daniel, and now he sees it firsthand again here with Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. These men should have burnt up straight away. Those mighty men, as soon as they opened the doors, they got slain by the fire. But these men, they were protected by God's mighty hand. And Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come forth. And so they called them out, and they was able to walk out in the midst of the fire. And then in verse 27, you've got all these witnesses around, the princes and the governors and the captains and the king's counsellors, and they gathered together and they saw these men, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. If you go, when we used to go out to the camps and we'd sit round on the fire, and you'd come away from that and your clothes used to stink of all the smoke that were coming up. If I'm cooking indoors, not very often, but if I'm cooking bacon or something, I've left the washing in the kitchen, all the washing then smells of all the bacon that I've been cooking. But these men, they've been in the middle of the burning fiery furnace, but God was so great that not only did the fire not touch them, but even the smell of the smoke hadn't got anywhere near them. They'd be completely engulfed in God's protection, and they had no fear of that at all. And these men were witness to that. These men could see the power of God, and they could see how wonderful God was. And then Nebuchadnezzar, he spake and he said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. So he'd gone from raising a statue of himself and calling himself a god, and then having all these other false gods, and now he'd seen the true God, his power come out, and he was now saying that, you're the servants of the Most High God, and he was blessing the name of God, and this angel who delivered his servants that trusted in him. And he said, look, in verse 28, it says, they've changed the king's word. They've yielded, these men who yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any other God except their own God. And he was amazed at their faith and their love that they had to God, that they would even give their lives up to do that. But he's seen how faithful God was to keep them through this. And then in verse 29, he says, therefore I make a decree that every people and nation and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, that they're going to lose out, and they'll be cut into pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. And if we take any things away from this tonight, let's think about that. When was it back when Nebuchadnezzar was threatening to throw him into the fiery furnace, and he said, verse 15, who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Back then he was confident in himself. Who is this God? Who is this God that you think is going to deliver you? I'm going to throw you into that fiery furnace and there's nothing you can do about it. Who is this God that you put your trust in? And then towards the end of the chapter now, Nebuchadnezzar knows exactly who this God is. This is a God who can keep these people safe. This is a God that shows Nebuchadnezzar that actually he doesn't have any power at all. And in the next chapter, we see Nebuchadnezzar completely humbled. You know, he still isn't really there yet. He still keeps thinking that he's the one that's making all these things happen. But then God shows him that, Nebuchadnezzar, you're nothing really. You're just a man. And he brings him down a peg or two and shows him that he is indeed the true God. So where do we stand in our lives? Do we lift God up as high as that? Who is the God that can do these things? The God of Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, the servants of the Most High God. Are we like that? Can we say that we're servants of the Most High God? Are we like Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego? Can we say, look, no matter what, we're going to serve God. No matter what, we're going to put his word first. And even if it means that we're going to lose out, so be it. We'd rather put God first than put ourselves first. And, are we fixing our heart on the things of this earth? Are we just looking at the things that we can hold? Are we just, are these the things that are important to us? Or are we looking ahead and are we lifting God up above everything else and saying that he is everything and that we should bring glory to him, and that's what he deserves? And can we say that we can do that? And then in the last verse there, the king promotes Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So you had, way back at the beginning, those people trying to overthrow Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego and try and show them up and get them to lose out, even to lose their lives. And yet because they kept God first in their life, God was faithful to keep them, and he never let them go.